Welcome to the Rise Up For You podcast, where thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and executives from around the world share their practical tips, strategies, and stories to help you unleash your potential and achieve your goals. Your journey of growth to become your best starts now.
Hi, I'm Neurodiversity, the CEO and the founder of Rise Up For You and the podcast host of the Rise Up For You podcast. We have another amazing guest for you today, but before we jump into our show, I want to remind you all that our show is completely ad-free and commercial-free. That's right. We want to make sure that you get full access to this podcast interview without any interruptions. So I have just a really small ask for you. We would be absolutely honored if you can share this podcast, send it to your family, your friends, your coworkers. Help us get the message out for this podcast because we are bringing you amazing interviews every single week with executives, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders that are here to help you become your absolute best. Share this podcast with anyone that you think would love to listen to it. Don't forget to subscribe and like so that you can get access every single week to the episodes that we're bringing straight to you. We appreciate you, and without you, this podcast would not exist. Okay, what do you say? You ready to jump into today's interview? I'll see you there. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rise Up For You podcast. This is your host and the founder of Rise Up For You, Neurodiversity. Welcome back. It's such an honor to be here with you today and also to have another amazing guest. Please help me welcome wherever you are. If you're on the car, on the treadmill, Ludmila Praslova, the author of The Canary Code. Hi, Ludmila. How are you today?
Fantastic. I'm so happy to be talking to you, Nada.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. Ludmila, remind me where you're calling in from.
I'm in California.
Oh, you're in California. Okay, so it's still nice and sunny there.
Yes, it is.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I always like to start the episode off by letting the audience get to know our guest. And I always like to hear from our guests themselves. So share with us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis to make an impact.
Well, I've been doing something that relates to inclusion my entire life. I started with global inclusion many years ago, more like decades ago. And then from global, the cultural international level, I started refocusing on all the other different aspects of how organizations could be inclusive of every aspect of human functioning. And how do we create cultures where really the entirety of a human is welcomed. And the last 5 years or so, I've been specifically working on neurodiversity inclusion and making sure our organizations are not leaving behind people who are extremely talented, but are also very much discriminated against in the current society. And the traditional definition would usually talk about, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, but neurodivergence is actually a much broader idea. First, neurodiversity is a characteristic of humanity. Humanity is diverse in how we function in our mind, in our emotional life. And then we could talk about neurominorities, which again would be those traditional groups that are kind of born different. But a broader definition of neurodivergence also includes acquired neurodivergence, which could be anything from brain trauma to now we talk about long COVID as a form of acquired neurodivergence.
Okay, so tell us a little bit how you got into this, Ludmila. Like, take us back to, you said you'd been doing this for a long time, even before you started discussing neurodivergence. So how did you even step into, diversity, equity, and inclusion? Like, what was the beginning of that journey?
I fell into it. There was a huge demand for people who could support intercultural communication and intercultural relations. And I just started doing it back when I was 19 years old through, translating, interpreting, and my degree was in human resources. So it was kind of natural
Yeah.
to then move into global diversity.
Okay, fantastic. So, I mean, you bring up a good point when it comes to, I'll be honest, most people don't understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion really embodies. They don't understand the demographics that fall under it, who can potentially be considered somebody that falls under the DEI category. So, talk to us a little bit more about neurodivergence and what that really means and who it encompasses.
Well, and I think to me, neurodivergence is a key to unlocking inclusion for everyone. Because otherwise, when we go after big categories, like let's say national level culture or gender, something that deals with very large groups. But then we're forgetting various intersectionalities, like let's do program for women, but we forget that some women are disabled, or we forget that some women are neurodivergent and use um, identity first language as preferred by those communities. So what happens is when we use those broad categories, then people say, oh, it doesn't apply to me, or they're doing all those things, but they're never going to help me because, yes, I'm a woman, but again, I am, let's say, a woman who is also dyslexic and deaf. That's the actual person. Uh, that's a story in my book, and so people don't really know what to do when someone is different in more than one way. And so I don't like talking about diversity as categories. I try to focus on the needs of multiply marginalized people and go to those who are excluded by variety of barriers that include in organizations. However, my emphasis is not on barriers because the DI classic that many people are kind of disappointed in is basically keeping organizational barriers but giving ladders to particular groups. Or then they're like, oh well, some people actually need a ramp and not a ladder, and that doesn't make any sense. So what I focus on is removal of organizational barriers that trip up multiple people rather than building additional ladders for people who fall into particular categories. So my approach is, let's not give one group a ladder and leave everybody else behind, or let's say ladder for women, but if you're a disabled woman, tough luck. Uh, but let's remove barriers. Let's make organizations who are participatory. So we ask people, what do they need? How do they work best? That are transparent, because many neurodivergent people don't do politics, and it's really hard to understand what's going on in the organization. It's really political. But that is also applicable to class migrants, people who are from the working class, who are now working in white collar environments, to immigrants, to people who are culturally different. So let's just make organizations transparent. That will help everyone. Let's make organizations flexible. Flexible work is essential for employment of neurodivergent people, of disabled people. But hey, mothers never said no to flexible work, and working students never said no to flexible work. So it helps multiple people. And because people are worried about, oh, flexibility, and then they're not going to do their jobs. Well, the next principle is focus on outcomes. That gives you accountability without monitoring people when they work or exactly how they work and allowed to work in their own style. So it's things like that, organizational justice and measurement, accurate measurement of for hiring or for promotion, rather than focusing on one specific category. It's applying those principles to make organizations more fair and just in general.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But I do want to go back, Ludmila, because I would like you, for the audience sake, to break down, who potentially would be neurodivergent. Like what does that mean for somebody that doesn't understand? Like who would be considered somebody that would fall under the neurodivergent category, so that people understand what exactly that is. Can you break that down in a tangible way?
Well, neurodivergent people basically are defined not necessarily by biology or by actual brain functioning and brain scans, but in some part by cultural norms. Because culture tells you, and I'm using the quotes, what is normal. So normal is someone who is extroverted, who is chatty, who makes eye contact, has a lot of social energy, for example. And for men, they don't cry in public. So there's also gender norm of what's expected. And then people labeled everyone else who doesn't fall into that weird. Again, I don't like this word. I'm using it intentionally, but as a bad word. And it's and then you get all kinds of blatant and subtle prejudice. But then those norms are a little bit different. If you look historically, those ideals have kind of changed. If you look geographically, the typical social behavior in the US versus Netherlands versus Japan is going to be very different. So normal can't really doesn't like actually exist, but we have the social construct of this ideal psychological functioning that we call neurotypical, which is culturally defined. But then people who either cannot conform to that because, let's say, they don't communicate the way you do. Maybe they need to communicate in writing and they can't speak. Or they really don't have that much social energy. They don't have the same conversational approach. And sometimes we can force ourselves to present as neurotypical, but it could be harmful and eventually will make us sick. So it's either people who can't present as neurotypical, or so we can force ourselves to present as neurotypical. So, for example, right now I'm probably presenting as neurotypical. I'm smiling, I'm making contact with the camera, and I can do this. I mean, I'm college professor, so I can be on. But if you force me to not just teach my classes, but also have social lunch and schmooze during lunch, I'm dead. I have only so much social energy. I can present as neurotypical, but if I have to present as neurotypical, 24/7 every day, I'm going to get sick
Isn't that
because
normal? Wouldn't that be considered, normal? I mean, eh, even somebody that you would say is neurotypical, eh, even they would be tired or energetically drained after a couple of hours of being on. No?
to a very different extent. It's like saying that, yeah, we all get tired or we all get bothered by TV. It's a very different level of drain. It's not a drain that's fixed by, 5 minutes of being off, or it's not a drain that is uh going to go away. Sometimes people can literally get autistic burnout and be unable to function for a long time. They literally can't talk. It's not just I'm going to get tired, I'm going to start sobbing uncontrollably in public.
Okay. Okay.
So it's
So
a very different level of social exhaustion.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit. So you wrote a book called The Canary Code. What's the Canary Code? What does that mean? I mean, obviously you wrote a whole book on it, so you're not going to give us everything now. But can you just give us the general synopsis on the Canary Code and how it works in the workplace and how it applies to us?
I actually already gave you the key principles. So the
Okay.
idea of canary code is that neurodivergent people are canaries in the workplace. And if there are stressors like poor work organization, bad leadership, toxic climate, unrealistic workloads, then yes, it is going to impact everyone. but neurodivergent people are going to be impacted first. So you just said that if we have very high social demands, even extroverts are going to feel it eventually. Autistic people are going to feel it much stronger and much earlier. So if we address those barriers and problems that prevent autistic people, for example, from being employed, period, because if it's just impossible to work when, let's say, everyone wants you to stare them in the eyes for 24/7, or they ask for particular things during the interview and they're very neurotypical things and we can't do it. So those things impact autistic people first. But if organizations continue demanding those things of people all the time, then it will stress everyone out. So canaries in coal mines are not the made up story. It's the actual real true history. And mines in the UK employed two canaries up through 1980s, specifically to detect toxic air, because canaries are not defective. Because they're able to fly and function as a bird, they also have more intense air metabolism. So when there is uh, the toxic air, the canary is going to be impacted first. And when they will see that this is happening, they actually had tiny little oxygen for them. So they had little cages where they were able to give canaries oxygen. But again, minors will be eventually affected. So if you think about autistic brain at rest processes 40% more information than the neurotypical brain. So we have more intense social environment metabolism, just like canary has more intense metabolism of oxygen. And if social environment is toxic, that we're going to be impacted first. But if we fix social environment, specifically in the workplace, to the point where autistic people can function, it means not only autistic people can function, but everyone else can thrive, because that requires a much less toxic and much more supportive organizations. So
Mhm.
that's the canary code.
That makes sense. So thank you for this, Ludmila. I think this is really important, especially, as we continue to grow in the workplace globally. There's a lot more globalization. There's a lot more organizations that have a global team. It's no longer just having a team that's, within a couple miles proximity. I mean, even with our clients, they have team members in California, in Germany, in Japan. I mean, they're really all over, right? And so this concept of neurodiversity and understand how to create a culture of inclusion, belonging for everyone is really critical. So I appreciate that. Ludmila, what I would like to do is jump into the power section of the interview and ask you some of our rapid fire questions. Sound good? All right. You're just on mute. We have to unmute you there. I don't know why you went back on mute.
No idea why this keeps happening.
There we go. Okay. So Ludmila, we always like to ask, if you can leave the world with one final message, we call it the golden nugget, what would that be for you?
I would try to ask people to pay attention to the most marginalized and barriers that prevent them from thriving in their environments. Because when you remove those barriers for the most marginalized, it is likely that you will improve environment for everyone, and you will help people have opportunities that otherwise they would have been excluded from for a long time. And it's something that is very easy to miss, because when this barrier doesn't impact us, we don't pay attention. So we need to be very intentional in saying, okay, this is not a barrier for me. Eye contact demand in the interview is not a barrier for me, but is it a barrier for other people? So pay attention to barriers that are not barriers for you and try to fix them so that we have a barrier-free workplaces and barrier-free life.
I love that. We also like to ask, we're very big here at Rise Up For You on values. What's one value that's a non-negotiable for you, Ludmila?
Well, integrity, honesty, because I think when we start twisting the truth and lying, it's just not going to benefit anyone in the long run.
Okay, great. And I have one more question for you, but before I ask it, tell the audience where we can find you, where we can find your book, we can connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yes. So Ludmila Praslova is going to bring up my LinkedIn profile, and very easy to find. My book, The Canary Code, is anywhere books are sold. And I also have a website, thecanarycode.com, just like the book title. And there are other articles, media appearances, and other kinds of information. But LinkedIn is a very easy way to find me, and that's one of the uh, situations when unique name is actually good. So if you Google Ludmila Praslova, my LinkedIn profile is going to come up.
Fantastic. Ludmila, thank you so much. My final question for you is, as you know, we're the company Rise Up For You. What comes to mind for you when you hear that phrase?
It sounds like something that should inspire us to improve and better ourselves. And again, from my perspective, I was also hope that it would also mean bettering other people.
Fantastic. Ludmila, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an honor to have you on the Rise Up For You podcast.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Nada.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining the Rise Up For You podcast. Every single week, we are bringing you multiple episodes, talking with thought leaders, experts, entrepreneurs from around the world with one mission, and that is to help you and your team become your absolute best. Don't forget to check us out at riseupforyou.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Make today great, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, Ludmila.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel and check us out on social media. We are everywhere, from LinkedIn to Instagram to Facebook, at our simple handle at Rise Up For You. On every single platform, it's exactly the same. And we're providing new content on every single platform, so there's something different everywhere. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our podcast, and connect with us on social media. I'll see you next time.